If you like our short stories, please like, comment and subscribe for more. The Great Hall was built to make children believe in certainty. Candles floated in disciplined rows above the tables, their flames steady and gold, refusing to flicker no matter how loud the room became. The enchanted ceiling wore a night sky like a mask, stars pinned exactly where someone had decided they belonged. 4 long tables cut through the hall like lines drawn by a ruler. Scarlet and gold. Green and silver. Blue and bronze. Each banner hanging heavy with history, each bench packed with laughter that sounded practiced. At the far end of the hall, beneath a dais and a line of stern-faced professors, sat a 3-legged stool. And on it, the sorting hat. It looked smaller than the stories. Older, too. Its brim sagged like a tired mouth. Its seams were stitched with dark thread that didn't glint like ordinary sewing. It had decided generations. Reduced children into houses the way a blade reduced bread into slices. One by one, names were called. One by one, students stepped forward, sat, waited, and left to cheering. The pattern soothed the room. Even the nervousness had its place. Fear was expected. Fear was normal. Fear meant you were still part of it. Elias Crow sat in the middle of the group of first years, hands folded in his lap, trying to breathe at the same pace as everyone else. He had learned early that if he matched the rhythm around him, things felt less sharp. A boy beside him, too eager, too loud, kept whispering guesses about which house would take him. A girl behind Elias kept smoothing her robe as if the fabric itself could be convinced to behave. Elias didn't speak. He watched. He listened. Not to the voices. To the castle. That was the part he never told anyone. The walls didn't speak in words, but Elias could feel something in them, a pressure behind sound, a pulse behind silence. Like the building was alive and pretending it wasn't. A name rang out. A boy walked forward, sat, was sorted, and ran to the cheering table of blue and bronze. The crowd roared as if the decision had mattered more than the child. Elias's throat tightened. He didn't know why his skin felt too thin tonight. Why the air seemed heavy, as if the hall itself was watching him back. More names. More cheers. More certainty. Then, Elias Crow. His name landed wrong in the air. Not because the headmistress mispronounced it. Not because anyone laughed. The sound itself simply felt misplaced, like a key sliding into the wrong lock. Elias stood. The walk to the stool felt longer than it should have. The space between the first-year lion and the dais widened in his mind like a corridor stretching when you weren't looking directly at it. He could feel eyes on him, hundreds of them, measuring his posture, his face, his chances. He sat on the stool. The sorting hat was lowered onto his head. For a moment, darkness. Then a voice, old as dust and deep as stone, slid into his thoughts. Elias Crow. Hearing his own name inside his skull made him flinch. The hat's tone wasn't unkind. It was interested. The way a scholar might regard a strange artifact. Let's see, then. Elias waited for the usual questions, the gentle probing of courage and loyalty, the amused commentary older siblings always described. He waited for the hat to praise or tease or hum. Instead, the hat fell silent. Seconds passed. Elias's palms began to sweat. Under the brim, his breath sounded too loud. He felt the hall beyond the hat like a living thing holding its breath. Then the hat spoke again, quietly. Ah. Not approval. Not delight. Recognition. You hear it, don't you? The hat murmured. The way magic moves. The way it shifts when someone lies. Elias swallowed. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. The hat pressed deeper, the way a finger presses bruised skin to test for pain. You've always known when a spell is wrong before it's cast, the hat said. You've always felt when something doesn't belong. Images flickered behind Elias's eyes, a glass shattering before it hit the floor, a candle extinguishing as someone reached for it, a door unlocking itself as if afraid to stay closed. Small things. Accidents. Everyone called them accidents. Elias felt the hat's attention sharpen. That isn't talent, it said slowly. It's affinity. Elias's heartbeat stumbled. The hat's voice dropped lower, almost reluctant. And affinity is dangerous. A murmur rose in the hall. Elias could hear it even through the hat. The shifting of benches. The impatient rustle of robes. Someone whispered, too loudly, "What's taking so long?" The hat did not respond to the noise. It responded to Elias. You could fit anywhere, it said. Which means you could become anything. A pause. And that is the problem. The hat seemed to weigh him, not like a judge, but like a scale trying to balance something that refused to settle. I could place you, it admitted. Green would welcome you. Blue would covet you. Red would try to save you. Yellow would try to soften you. Elias's throat tightened. He felt, suddenly, the strange certainty that the hat wasn't describing houses. It was describing strategies. But a house is not a home, the hat continued. It is a shape. A cage with banners. Elias held his breath. The hat's voice became a whisper, so quiet Elias thought he imagined it. If I place you, the castle will notice. Elias's stomach turned. And if the castle notices, it will remember. The hat paused. Then, softer still, and if it remembers, it will act. Elias's mind raced. Act how? Against him? For him? What did the castle do when it decided something needed to be handled? The hat's tone changed, tight, final, almost grim. No. I will not place you. Elias's eyes flew open beneath the brim, though he couldn't see anything. Elias Crow, the hat said, clear as a bell inside his head, as if it wanted the name to stick, you are dangerous. The hat was lifted off abruptly. Light flooded Elias's vision. For a heartbeat, the great hall was silent. Then the noise returned, but wrong, too fast, too nervous, like laughter after a funeral. The headmistress rose from her seat. Her expression was composed, but Elias saw it in her eyes, a calculation, quick and cold, as if she'd been waiting for this possibility and was already moving through the steps. There will be a brief delay, she announced, her voice smooth enough to calm the room by force. The sorting will continue. A few students laughed uncertainly. Most didn't. Two professors approached Elias from either side. They did not touch him. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough to guide him like invisible hands. This way, Mr. Crow, one said quietly. Elias stumbled off the stool. He glanced back once. The sorting hat lay on the stool, brim drawn tight, as if it had clamped down on a secret it regretted speaking aloud. The side door the professors led him through was narrow and plain, unmarked, placed where Elias could have sworn there had been wall. The warmth of the great hall vanished the moment the door closed behind him. The corridor beyond was colder, the stone darker. The torches burned with a muted blue flame. Elias expected portraits, windows, suits of armor, anything to make the castle feel like itself. There were none. The walls were bare. The silence was clean. And behind that clean silence, Elias felt something else, something like attention. As they walked, Elias became aware of a faint pressure in the air, as if the castle leaned toward him the way a person leaned toward a whisper. They stopped at a narrow door at the end of the corridor. It had no handle. No markings. No hinges he could see. One professor spoke again, softer now. You will remain here until further notice. Until I'm sorted? Elias asked, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. The professor hesitated, just for a breath. Until you are placed, they said. The word was careful. Elias felt the difference. Placed, not sorted. Like an object. Like a problem. The door opened without anyone touching it. The space inside was dim and narrow, lit by thin seams of pale light in the stone. It looked unfinished, as if it had been carved quickly and then forgotten. Elias stepped inside. The door closed behind him. There was no click of a lock. But Elias knew he wasn't leaving. He stood still, listening. Somewhere beyond the walls, the castle shifted, subtle, almost polite. The sound of ancient stone settling into a choice. And for the first time that night, Elias understood what the hat had meant. The castle wasn't just a place where magic happened. The castle was part of the magic. And now it had noticed him. Elias whispered his name once, just to prove it still belonged to him. Elias Crow. The sound felt thin in the air. Fragile. As if saying it too often might wear it away. The door closed without a sound. Elias stood still, waiting for the click of a lock that never came. The silence pressed in around him, clean and deliberate, like the pause between breaths. For a moment, he wondered if the professors were still standing outside, listening. Then he felt it, that subtle pressure again, the sense of attention sliding away, satisfied for now. The room he stood in was narrow and long, its walls carved from the same grey stone as the rest of the castle, but stripped of everything that made the place feel inhabited. No banners. No portraits. No decorative flourishes worn smooth by generations of hands. The stone here looked unfinished, as though the builders had stopped midway through a thought. Thin seams of pale light glowed along the walls, not bright enough to cast shadows, not dim enough to be darkness. The air smelled faintly of dust and something colder, like rain that never quite fell. A corridor stretched ahead of him. Doors lined both sides, identical, evenly spaced, each with a shallow indentation where a handle should have been. The floor beneath Elias's feet was smooth, far smoother than it should have been, worn down by more passage than the school ever admitted to having. He took a step forward. The corridor responded. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But the air shifted, warming by a fraction, the glow along the walls brightening just enough to notice. Elias stopped, heart thudding. It knows I'm here, he thought. The idea unsettled him more than the silence had. He walked on. As he passed the first door, then the second, faint sounds began to bleed into the corridor. Soft murmurs. Half-formed echoes. They weren't voices, not exactly, but they carried the suggestion of speech, like words that had been spoken once and never finished. The third door opened. A girl stood in the doorway, studying him. She was about his age, her dark hair pulled back carelessly, her expression sharp in a way that suggested she missed very little. She wore standard school robes, but they were wrong, no house colors, no crest, no identifying stitch. Just plain black fabric, as if it hadn't yet been allowed to mean anything. "You're late," she said. Elias blinked. "I was at the sorting." "So were we," she replied. "Come on." She stepped aside, revealing a small room behind her. 2 narrow beds. A desk bolted to the floor. A window set deep into the wall, its glass clouded with a pale haze that didn't look out onto sky or ground, or anything at all. "I'm Mara," she said. "Mara Vale." "Elias," he replied automatically. "Elias Crow." She nodded once, committing it to memory. The way she did it, careful, intentional, made Elias suddenly aware of how important that felt. "Don't shout your name in here," Mara added. "Why not?" She hesitated, just long enough to matter. "You'll see." They stepped back into the corridor together. More doors opened as they walked. Faces appeared, boys and girls of different ages, some younger than Elias, some older. All wore the same unmarked robes. All watched quietly, with expressions that ranged from wary curiosity to something closer to acceptance. "How many of us are there?" Elias asked. Mara shrugged. "Depends on the year. Depends on the hat." "Do they tell you why you're here?" "No," she said. "They tell you what not to do." The corridor widened near its end, opening into a chamber shaped like a shallow bowl. Curved benches rose in tiers around a low platform. There was no blackboard. No lectern. No windows. The walls here were darker, the light thinner, as if even illumination hesitated to stay. Students filtered in, taking seats without being told. Elias noticed that no one chose the front row. A figure stood at the center of the platform. They wore professors' robes, though the cut was unfamiliar, older, perhaps, or simply designed not to draw attention. Elias tried to focus on their face and found it strangely difficult, as though his eyes slid off details that should have stuck. "Welcome," the figure said calmly. "You are here because you could not be placed." A pause, deliberate. "That does not mean you failed." A subtle release rippled through the room. Shoulders eased. Someone exhaled. "It means," the figure continued, "that the system could not safely predict you." The release snapped back into tension. "I am Professor Halvan," they said. "I oversee this wing." Mara leaned closer to Elias and whispered, "That's the only name they've ever given us." Halvan paced slowly across the platform, hands folded behind their back. "You will remain here temporarily," they said. "This is the interim wing." "How long is temporary?" a boy asked from the back. Professor Halvan smiled faintly. "That depends on you." No one laughed. "You will attend lessons," Halvan continued. "You will follow rules. You will not attempt to leave this wing without permission." "And then we get sorted?" Elias asked. Halvan turned to look at him. Their gaze was steady, assessing. "Some of you will," they said. The word "some" settled heavily in the room. "You are not prisoners," Halvan added. "You are considerations." Elias didn't like the sound of that. "Tonight, you will rest," Halvan said. "Tomorrow, your education begins." As they turned to leave, Elias noticed something strange. Where Halvan had stood, the air shimmered faintly, as if reality itself needed a moment to remember how to behave. Later, in the narrow room assigned to him, Elias lay awake on the bed, staring at the stone ceiling. There were no stars painted there. No enchantments mimicking the sky. Just bare rock. He tried to recall the sorting ceremony, the candles, the banners, the sound of his name being called, but the details felt blurred, already thinning like ink washed with water. A flicker of panic rose in his chest. Elias whispered his name under his breath. "Elias Crow." The sound felt fragile in the room, like something that might crack if handled too roughly. From somewhere deep within the walls, the castle shifted, subtle, patient, ancient. Elias realized, with a creeping certainty, that this place had existed long before him. And that it would still be here long after his name was gone. Morning in the interim wing did not arrive so much as it was permitted. The pale seams of light in the walls brightened by a fraction, just enough to signal change. There was no bell. No rush of voices. No sense of beginning. Elias woke with the unsettling feeling that the wing had already been awake, watching, waiting for him to catch up. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed and tried, deliberately, to remember yesterday in order. The sorting. The hat. His name spoken aloud. The memory felt thinner than it should have, like a page that had been handled too often. He pressed his fingers into the mattress, grounding himself, then whispered softly, "Elias Crow," as if anchoring the syllables to his tongue. When he stepped into the corridor, doors were already opening in sequence. Students emerged quietly, eyes alert, movements careful. No one spoke at first. The wing did not feel like a place that tolerated unnecessary sound. Mara Vale fell into step beside him without looking over. "First lesson," she said. "Watch everything." "What happens if you don't?" Elias asked. She exhaled through her nose. "You stop being watched." That answer stayed with him. The chamber at the end of the corridor looked the same as it had the night before, but it felt different now, less like a waiting room and more like a test. The curved benches held the students in a loose arc. The low platform sat bare, expectant. Professor Halvan appeared without ceremony. One moment the platform was empty. The next, Halvan stood there, hands folded behind their back, face calm, unreadable. "Today," Halvan said, "we begin by removing an assumption." They lifted one hand. A wooden box rose smoothly from the stone floor beside them. Its lid slid open, revealing a neat row of wands inside, polished, familiar, comforting. A ripple of instinctive longing passed through the students. Halvan did not invite anyone to take one. "You believe magic requires a wand," Halvan said. "That belief is useful." They closed the lid. "It is not true." The box sank back into the floor and vanished. "In the main school," Halvan continued, pacing slowly, "you are taught to persuade magic through shape and focus. Wood. Core. Movement. This keeps magic predictable. Contained." Halvan stopped and looked up at the students. "Contained magic," they said, "is obedient magic." Elias felt something stir in his chest, not fear, but recognition. "In the interim wing," Halvan said, "you will meet magic without its leash." A few students shifted uneasily. "Stand." They obeyed. Halvan raised their hand again. A thin strand of silvery light formed between their fingers, delicate, trembling, alive in a way that made Elias's skin prickle. "This is a binding thread," Halvan said. "Harmless. Simple." They flicked their wrist. The thread drifted outward, floating like a lazy ribbon, and wrapped itself gently around the wrist of the first student in line. "Do not dodge," Halvan said calmly. The thread moved from student to student, circling wrists, forearms. Some flinched. Some froze. When it reached Elias, the sensation was immediate and intimate, like a thought pressing into his skin. The thread believed it belonged there. "Close your eyes," Halvan said. The chamber went dark. "Magic is not a tool," Halvan continued. "It is an agreement. It offers. It demands. It remembers." The thread tightened slightly around Elias's wrist, not painful, just insistent. "And magic," Halvan said softly, "lies." Elias focused inward. He didn't push. He didn't fight. He simply listened, to the way the thread asserted itself, to the quiet certainty it projected. "This is true," it said without words. "This is allowed." Elias answered just as quietly. "No." The thread hesitated. Elias pressed the denial deeper, calm and precise. "You don't belong to me." The thread unraveled, dissolving into cool air. Elias opened his eyes. Around him, results varied. A few students had succeeded, their threads gone. Others struggled, tugging uselessly. Near the end of the line, a younger girl stood trembling, the thread wrapped tightly around her arm. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her name, Elias learned a moment later, was Elowen Pike. "I can't," Elowen whispered, her voice thin with panic. "It won't listen." Professor Halvan approached her, movements unhurried. "It is listening," Halvan said gently. "It prefers you afraid." Elowen squeezed her eyes shut and tried again. The thread tightened, crawling higher up her arm. Someone whispered her name. Elias repeated it silently, instinctively. "Elowen Pike. Elowen Pike." Halvan straightened. With 2 fingers, they touched the thread. It vanished instantly. Relief flooded Elowen's face. Her knees buckled slightly. For one heartbeat, the room exhaled. Then Halvan placed a hand lightly against Elowen's forehead. Her eyes went unfocused. The color drained from her expression, not physically, but meaningfully. Like someone dimming a lamp behind her eyes. "Elowen Pike," Halvan said once, clearly. Then Halvan stepped aside. Elowen turned and walked toward the side door without resistance. Her steps were calm. Empty. The door opened. She passed through. It closed behind her. No one spoke. Halvan returned to the platform. "Do not misunderstand," they said. "Elowen has not been punished." A pause. "She has been reassigned." "To where?" a boy asked, voice barely steady. Halvan looked at him with something like sympathy. "To where she will do the least harm." The glow in the walls dimmed slightly, as if acknowledging the statement. "Magic is dangerous," Halvan continued. "Not because it is dark. Not because it is evil." A pause. "But because it is honest." Elias felt cold settle in his chest. "If you cannot control what you are," Halvan said, "then the world will control you." The lesson ended without dismissal. The students filed out slowly, shoulders tight, eyes lowered. In the corridor, Mara finally spoke. "They won't say her name again," she said quietly. Elias swallowed. "I will." Mara looked at him sharply. "Don't," she warned. "That's how it starts." Elias didn't answer. Because even as he repeated Elowen Pike in his mind, he could feel the wing pressing back, softly, patiently, testing how long he could hold on. And Elias understood something then, with terrible clarity. The punishment here wasn't pain. It was forgetting. Elowen Pike's bed was empty. Elias noticed it the moment he stepped into the corridor. The door to her room stood open, the pale seams of light along the walls flowing past it as if nothing had ever occupied that space. Inside, the mattress lay perfectly smooth. The blanket was folded with clinical precision. The desk held no books. No scratches. No sign that a person had slept there only hours before. It wasn't abandonment. It was correction. Elias stopped walking. Around him, the other students moved on without comment, filing toward the chamber at the end of the hall. No one looked into the room. No one slowed. The wing itself seemed eager to pass it by, the air subtly urging movement forward. "Don't," Mara said quietly, her voice low and urgent. Elias hadn't realized he'd taken a step toward the doorway. "They don't like it when you linger," she added. "Who?" he asked. Mara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Professor Halvan waited in the chamber, hands folded behind their back as usual, posture relaxed in a way that suggested nothing here could surprise them anymore. The curved benches filled quickly. Elias sat beside Mara, his attention caught between Halvan and the echoing absence of Elowen Pike's name pounding behind his eyes. Halvan surveyed the room. "You are fewer today," they said calmly. No one responded. "That is expected," Halvan continued. "Reassignment is not failure. It is function." Elias felt something twist in his chest. "Today," Halvan said, "you will observe." With a small gesture, the stone wall behind the platform rippled. A doorway formed where there had been solid rock moments before. Beyond it lay a narrow chamber, smaller than the classroom, lit not by seams in the walls but by a single, steady glow suspended in the air. The light pulsed slowly, like a heart. "Come," Halvan said. The students followed. The room beyond smelled faintly of ozone and old ink. Runes were carved into the floor in overlapping circles, some precise, others worn thin by time. At the center stood a single chair. Elowen Pike sat in it. Elias's breath caught. She looked fine. Upright. Calm. Her eyes tracked the room as the students entered, unfocused but not empty. When her gaze brushed over Elias, there was no recognition. Not confusion. Nothing. This, Halvan said evenly, is reassignment. Elowen's hands rested in her lap. She wasn't bound. She wasn't restrained. The chair itself felt like a suggestion rather than a prison. Elias took a half-step forward without thinking. Elowen, he said. The name echoed strangely in the room, like it didn't quite fit the space. Elowen didn't react. Halvan turned to Elias, their expression neither annoyed nor surprised. She cannot hear herself anymore, they said. Names are anchors. Once removed, the mind drifts. What did you do to her? Elias demanded. Halvan regarded him carefully. We removed what made her dangerous, they replied. Her capacity to be remembered. The suspended light pulsed brighter. Watch, Halvan said. They lifted their hand and traced a slow, deliberate symbol in the air. The runes on the floor responded, glowing faintly in sequence. Elias felt it immediately, a pressure behind his eyes, like a hand closing gently around a thought. The students around him stiffened. Elowen's head tilted slightly. What is your name? Halvan asked her. She opened her mouth. Her voice faltered. I don't. The pause stretched. I don't know, she finished quietly. The suspended light pulsed again. Your house? Halvan prompted. Elowen frowned, genuinely trying. I think I was. Nothing came. Mara's fingers clenched against the bench beside Elias. You see, Halvan said, almost gently, magic remembers what the world agrees to remember. We simply withdraw consensus. Elias felt sick. This isn't containment, he said. It's deletion. Halvan nodded once. Correct. They turned back to Elowen. Do you feel pain? Halvan asked. Elowen shook her head. No. Fear. Another pause. No. Loss. Elowen hesitated. Her brow creased faintly, as if she sensed a missing limb she couldn't name. I feel lighter, she said. The word settled heavily in the room. Halvan lowered their hand. The runes dimmed. Elowen Pike, Halvan said clearly, one final time. The name rang in Elias's ears. Then it slid. Not vanished, slid, like something easing off a surface it no longer adhered to. Elias felt it happen. The syllables lost weight. Shape. Meaning. Elowen Pike, he repeated silently, panic sharpening his focus. The name flickered. Elias pressed his nails into his palm, grounding himself in pain, forcing the sound to stay whole. Across the room, other students blinked. A boy frowned. Who is she? Mara sucked in a sharp breath. Halvan looked pleased. The process is nearly complete, they said. Elowen, no, the girl, stood when Halvan gestured. She followed them toward a second doorway Elias hadn't noticed before. Where is she going? Elias asked, his voice hoarse. To where she will do the least harm, Halvan replied again. The door opened. The girl walked through. It closed. The suspended light dimmed and vanished. The runes faded into inert stone. The room was suddenly just a room. You will forget her, Halvan said calmly, turning back to the students. Not today. Not all at once. But soon. Elias's heart hammered. And if we don't? He asked. Halvan met his gaze. Then you will be observed more closely. The students were dismissed without ceremony. Back in the corridor, Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His mind felt bruised, tender in places he couldn't quite locate. Elowen Pike, he whispered. The name slipped. Not gone, but fraying. Mara grabbed his sleeve. Stop, she said urgently. You can't hold it like that. I have to, Elias said. If I let go, you don't understand, Mara said, her voice shaking now. They don't erase people. They erase the space they take up. If you keep trying to fill it, she broke off. What? Elias demanded. Mara swallowed. The space pushes back. That night, lying in his narrow bed, Elias tested himself. He named the people he remembered. His parents. His teachers. His classmates. All intact. Then he tried again. Elowen Pike. The name came out wrong. Flattened. Empty. Elias stared at the ceiling, dread curling through him. Because he knew two things with absolute certainty. First, the interim wing did not punish failure. It punished persistence. And second, if Elias Crow ever became inconvenient enough, the wing would make sure there was nothing left of him to miss. Elias began counting absences. At first, it was instinct. A reflex left over from school lessons where roll was called and names were expected to answer back. In the interim wing, no one took attendance. No lists were read aloud. No names were checked. But Elias watched the benches anyway, marking who sat where, who leaned against which section of wall, who always arrived a breath too late. And who didn't arrive at all. The morning after Elowen's reassignment, there were 2 empty seats instead of 1. No one mentioned it. Professor Halvan spoke as they always did, calm, precise, unhurried, continuing lessons as though nothing had changed. The students listened, learned, obeyed. Elias did too. Outwardly. Inwardly, he held on. Every night, after the wing dimmed into its false version of sleep, Elias lay awake and recited names under his breath. He spoke them slowly, carefully, as if each syllable were fragile glass. Elowen Pike. Mara Vale. Elias Crow. The first name slipped more each time. Sometimes he couldn't remember Elowen's face. Sometimes he could see her clearly but not hear her voice. Once, horrifyingly, he forgot why he was saying her name at all. That was when he started writing them down. It wasn't easy. The interim wing did not like records. Ink behaved strangely here. Words bled into the page, then thinned, as if the parchment itself resented being asked to remember. Elias learned quickly that ordinary quills wouldn't work. The ink faded within minutes, letters paling until they resembled impressions more than writing. So he improvised. In the forgotten classroom, a narrow, dust-heavy room sealed behind a door that only appeared when Elias wasn't looking for it, he found scraps of older parchment. Brittle. Yellowed. Already half forgotten. They held better, as if memory recognized its own decay. Elias pressed harder when he wrote. He etched names deep enough to scar the page. The first list was short. Elowen Pike. He stared at the single name for a long time, waiting for it to resist. It wavered slightly, the ink thinning at the edges, but it stayed. Barely. That was when he realized the truth: memory here wasn't erased all at once. It was starved. Days passed. Lessons continued. Students came and went with quiet regularity. Elias added names when he could, only when he was sure, only when the absence felt wrong enough to matter. Some names faded before he could write them down. Others lingered. One evening, as Elias was slipping back toward the corridor from the forgotten classroom, he nearly collided with Mara. She caught his arm, eyes sharp. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," Elias said automatically. Mara didn't let go. "That's a lie." He hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded toward the door behind him. Her expression tightened. You shouldn't go there, she said. I already do. Mara exhaled, frustrated. Elias, do you remember Elowen? He asked quietly. Mara's mouth opened. Closed. Her brow furrowed. There was a girl, she said slowly. Young. Quiet. Elias's chest tightened. Her name? Mara shook her head. I don't know. I know she mattered. I know she left. That's not leaving, Elias said. Mara's gaze flicked down the corridor, checking for movement. You can't save them. I'm not trying to save them, Elias said. I'm trying to prove they were here. That stopped her. Mara studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. Then she spoke again, more quietly. There are others, she said. Before us. Elias's pulse quickened. You remember them? Not clearly, Mara admitted. But I remember the gaps. Years ago, when I first arrived, there were older students. They taught me how to keep my head down. What happened to them? Mara looked away. They left. The words sounded wrong coming from her. That night, Elias added a new heading to his parchment. The ones WHO left beneath it, he wrote Elowen Pike's name again, pressing so hard the parchment nearly tore. Over the following weeks, patterns emerged. Some students vanished after failing lessons. That much Elias expected. But others disappeared after succeeding too well. After asking the wrong questions. After lingering too long near forbidden doors. One name resurfaced again and again in whispers, never fully remembered, never fully gone. Someone who had tried to dismantle the wing once. Someone the system had needed to forget. Elias couldn't remember the name. But the space it left behind felt enormous. Then, one afternoon, Professor Halvan paused mid-lesson. Their gaze swept the chamber, settling briefly on Elias. Curiosity, Halvan said calmly, is a form of hunger. The room stilled. Hunger, Halvan continued, can be fed. Or it can consume. Their eyes did not leave Elias's face. You would do well to consider which you are becoming. Later that evening, Elias returned to the forgotten classroom. The parchment lay where he'd left it. But the heading had changed. Not erased. Altered. The ones WHO left had been rewritten in thinner, fainter strokes Elias did not remember making. It now read, the ones WHO were taken. Elias's stomach dropped. Someone else had been there. Someone who knew. And for the first time since entering the interim wing, Elias felt something close to hope. They told him it would be simple. That was the word Professor Halvan used, spoken with the same careful neutrality they applied to everything else. Simple, as if complexity were a matter of perspective rather than consequence. You will observe, Halvan said, standing at the center of the chamber. You will assist if instructed. You will not interfere. Elias stood with 3 other students at the front of the room. Mara was beside him, arms folded tightly, her jaw set. This is not a punishment, Halvan continued. It is an education. The stone behind them rippled. A doorway formed, wider than the others Elias had seen, its edges shimmering faintly. Beyond it lay night, real night, heavy and damp, carrying the smell of soil and rain. The world outside. Elias's breath caught. It had been weeks since he'd seen anything that wasn't stone and pale light. You will stay together, Halvan said. You will listen. And above all, you will remember what you are here to do. The last part felt deliberate. They stepped through the doorway. The air changed immediately. It pressed against Elias's skin with weight and texture. Wind moved. Leaves whispered. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried, not enchanted, not symbolic, just alive. They stood at the edge of a small village. Stone cottages clustered together, their windows dark except for one at the far end of the lane. A faint, uneven glow pulsed from inside it, too slow to be candlelight, too erratic to be fire. "That's the source," said the instructor accompanying them, an older witch Elias didn't recognize, her robes marked with no crest. "Unstable manifestation. Localized." "What does that mean?" one of the other students asked. "It means the magic doesn't know what it wants to be," she replied. "And when magic hesitates, people get hurt." They moved carefully down the lane. As they drew closer, Elias felt it, the same sensation he'd felt in the interim wing, but sharper now. Magic pressed against him from all sides, raw and unsettled, like an animal trapped in too small a space. "You feel it too, don't you?" the instructor said quietly, glancing at him. Elias nodded. "Good," she said. "That's why you're here." They stopped outside the glowing cottage. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, leaking through the cracks in the stone like something trying to escape. The instructor raised a hand and knocked once. The door opened immediately. A man stood there, middle-aged, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes flicked past the instructor, past the students, as if he were already looking for something else. "I knew you'd come," he said. His voice wasn't afraid. It was tired. Inside, the cottage was neat, almost obsessively so. Everything had been pushed away from the center of the room, where a faint distortion hung in the air, like heat shimmer, but colder. The magic there throbbed, expanding and contracting in shallow breaths. "I tried to stop it," the man said. "I really did." "What did you do?" the instructor asked. The man laughed softly. "I listened." Elias stiffened. "Magic talks," the man continued. "Not in words. In pressure. In possibility. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it." Elias felt Mara tense beside him. "I thought I could guide it," the man said. "Help it become something harmless. Something new." The instructor's expression hardened. "You interfered." "I adapted," the man replied. "Isn't that what magic does?" The distortion pulsed violently. The air snapped, sharp and cold. The instructor stepped forward. "That's enough." She gestured to the students. "Containment." They moved as they'd been taught, forming a loose circle around the distortion. No wands. No incantations. Just focus. Presence. Elias closed his eyes. The magic roared. Not sound, pressure. It shoved against his thoughts, insisting on being something. Fire. Wind. Memory. It tried shapes, discarded them, tried again. "Help me," it seemed to say. Elias felt his chest tighten. "No," he answered gently, firmly. "You don't belong here." The others joined him, their denials overlapping, layering certainty over chaos. Slowly, the distortion shrank, folding inward like a thought being withdrawn. With a final pulse, it vanished. The room went still. The man sagged against the wall, relief washing over his face. "It's gone," he whispered. "Yes," the instructor said. "It is." She turned to the students. "You did well." Elias stared at the empty space where the magic had been. His hands were shaking. "What happens to him?" Elias asked. The instructor looked at the man. "That depends," she said. "On how much he remembers." The man looked up sharply. "Remembers what?" The instructor met his gaze. "Where you learned to listen." The man's expression changed. Understanding dawned, slow, terrible. "I was like you," he said softly, looking at Elias now. "Wasn't I?" Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. "I wasn't sorted," the man continued. "They told me I was dangerous too." Mara sucked in a breath. "I ran," the man said. "I hid." I thought if I stayed quiet, the world would forget me. He laughed bitterly. It didn't. The instructor stepped closer. You know what comes next, she said. The man closed his eyes. I hoped it wouldn't. Elias took a step forward. Wait. Everyone froze. You said this was unstable magic, Elias said. But it's gone. He's not dangerous anymore. The instructor studied him. Danger is not always immediate, Mr. Crow. She turned back to the man. Thank you for your cooperation, she said calmly. She raised her hand. The man flinched. Elias acted without thinking. No, he said, quiet, certain. The word cut through the air. The instructor's hand hesitated. Just for a moment. The man stared at Elias, eyes wide. Don't, he whispered. If you interfere. Elias felt the pressure surge, not from the magic, but from the system itself, like the wing had reached across distance to steady the balance. The instructor lowered her hand. Enough, she said sharply. We're leaving. The man slumped, stunned. As they stepped back into the night, Elias's pulse thundered in his ears. You shouldn't have done that, Mara said under her breath. I know, Elias replied. Behind them, the cottage light dimmed. But as the doorway back to the wing formed, Elias knew something had shifted. The man had been unsorted. He had escaped. And the system had come for him anyway. Elias understood now. They weren't trained to stop dark magic. They were trained to stop change. After the field assignment, the wing watched Elias more closely. He felt it in the way doors opened a moment later than usual. In the way Professor Halvan's gaze lingered, not accusing, not angry, simply attentive. Like a scholar who had noticed an unexpected variable and wanted to see how it behaved. Elias did not stop behaving. He just became quieter. The forgotten classroom revealed itself more often now. Sometimes Elias would turn a corner expecting bare stone, and the door would be there, narrow, warped, its outline blurred like a thought half remembered. Other times, he would search for it deliberately and find nothing at all. He learned quickly, the room appeared when he wasn't trying to use it. Inside, the air smelled of dust and time. Shelves sagged under the weight of old volumes, their spines cracked, titles rubbed nearly smooth. These weren't forbidden books in the dramatic sense. No screaming covers. No curses biting at fingers. They were worse. They were ignored. Elias ran his hand along the shelves, listening. The magic here felt different, older, less constrained, like it had grown before anyone decided it should stop. Mara stood watch by the door, arms crossed. If Halvan finds you in here, she said, you won't get reassigned. Elias glanced back. What will I get? Mara didn't answer. He pulled a thin book from the shelf at random. The pages were yellowed, the ink uneven. No author. No publication date. Just a title, written in a careful hand. On the failure of containment, Elias's pulse quickened. He read. The language was dry, almost academic, but the implications clawed at him. The book spoke of magical surges that could not be traced to curses or dark rituals. Of spells that altered themselves mid-cast. Of children who could hear magic the way others heard music. Affinity. The word appeared again and again. These are us, Elias whispered. Mara leaned over his shoulder, reading silently. Her jaw tightened. Keep going, she said. Elias did. Another book followed. Then another. Each one painted the same picture from different angles. Periods of instability. Bursts of innovation. New forms of magic that frightened those in power because they could not be predicted, standardized, or taught safely. And each time, without fail, the same response. Erasure. Not always quiet. Not always clean. Sometimes the system let the world see a villain. Elias froze at the name on the page. A sorcerer condemned centuries ago. Blamed for a magical catastrophe that reshaped an entire region. History remembered him as a madman obsessed with forbidden spells. But in the margin, someone had written a single word in faded ink. Unsorted. Elias's stomach dropped. He flipped pages faster now. Another name. Another infamous figure. Another margin note. Unsorted. 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 They weren't villains, Mara said hoarsely. They were failures. No, Elias said, the truth crystallizing with awful clarity. They were backups. Mara looked at him. When erasure didn't work, Elias continued, when someone escaped, when the system couldn't contain them quietly. They let them become monsters, Mara finished. So the story could make sense. So the system could justify itself. Elias leaned back against the shelf, heart racing. Every story he'd grown up with, every warning, every bedtime tale about dark magic and hubris, shifted in his mind. The villains hadn't risen. They'd been released. Later that night, Professor Halvan summoned him alone. The chamber felt colder with only the two of them present. The seams of light along the walls dimmed, attentive. "You've been reading," Halvan said. Elias didn't deny it. "So have you?" Halvan's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Yes." "Why?" Elias asked. "Why not just erase them all?" Halvan studied him for a long moment. "Because erasure is inefficient," they said finally. "And because fear is instructive." Elias felt something in him harden. "You let them destroy things," he said. "You let people die." Halvan nodded. "And in doing so, the world learned what to avoid. That's monstrous." Halvan's gaze was steady. "So is collapse." They stepped closer. "Magic is not infinite, Elias Crow," Halvan said quietly. "It is volatile. Alive. When it changes too quickly, reality tears." Elias thought of the man in the village. Of the magic that had begged for help. "You manufacture villains," Elias said. "So the world will accept your rules." Halvan inclined their head. "We provide narratives." The word settled like ash. "Be careful," Halvan added. "You are beginning to sound like those who came before you." Elias met their gaze. "What happened to them?" Halvan's eyes flickered, just once. "They proved their point," they said. And the world nearly ended. The chamber brightened again, signaling dismissal. As Elias turned to leave, Halvan spoke once more. "History is not written by victors," they said softly. "It is written by survivors." Elias returned to the forgotten classroom that night and added new names to his list. Not the villains. The unsorted who never made it into the stories. He understood now why the wing punished persistence. Why curiosity was dangerous. Because once you saw the pattern, you could never unsee it. The forgotten classroom had a second door. Elias didn't notice it at first. That was the trick of it. The room presented itself as complete: 4 walls, sagging shelves, a single long table scarred by time. Every visit felt slightly different, but never enough to draw suspicion. The magic here didn't hide things. It relied on assumption. Elias noticed the door only after he stopped looking for answers. He had been sitting at the table, staring at his list of names, when the air shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to make the back of his neck prickle. The smell of dust deepened, tinged now with something sharper, like cold iron and old rain. He looked up. The door stood behind the shelves, half obscured by shadow. Narrow. Seamless. Its outline trembled faintly, as if it weren't fully decided on existing. Mara stiffened. That wasn't there before. Elias didn't answer. His pulse had slowed instead of quickened, an instinctive calm that always came when magic was close to becoming something else. He stood and approached the shelves. As he did, the books nearest the door shifted aside without sound, creating a narrow passage. The door opened. Beyond it lay a room unlike any Elias had seen before. The walls weren't stone. They were glass. Not transparent glass, but layered panes, clouded and fractured, each etched with runes that overlapped and rewrote one another. The room glowed faintly from within, light refracting endlessly through symbols that never quite settled into a single meaning. At the center hovered a shape. A spell. Not cast. Growing. It pulsed slowly, like a living heart, threads of magic branching outward, retracting, branching again, testing forms, discarding them. The air vibrated with possibility. Mara sucked in a breath. What is that? Elias stepped closer. It's unfinished, he said softly. And it doesn't want to be. The spell reacted to his presence, its glow brightening. Elias felt it immediately, that familiar pressure behind thought, the sense of being listened to. Don't, Mara whispered. This is exactly how people disappear. Elias ignored her. He reached out, not with his hand, but with his attention. The spell responded eagerly. Images flooded his mind. Magic reshaping itself without violence. Spells that adapted instead of shattered. Enchantments that learned from failure instead of punishing it. This changes everything, Mara breathed. That's why it's hidden, Elias said. A voice spoke behind them. Indeed. Professor Halvan stood in the doorway. They looked almost tired. You weren't meant to find this yet, Halvan said. Mara spun around. Yet? Halvan stepped into the room, the glass walls rippling faintly at their presence. This is not dark magic, Elias said. It's not destructive. It's evolution, Halvan finished. Yes. Then why suppress it? Halvan regarded the spell with something like regret. Because magic does not evolve gently, they said. It leaps. And when it leaps, it breaks things. Or it frees them, Elias shot back. Halvan's gaze hardened. Tell me, they said quietly, how many villages would you be willing to lose while magic experiments? Elias hesitated. Mara's silence was sharper than any answer. This spell, Halvan continued, was created by an unsorted student nearly a century ago. Brilliant. Compassionate. Absolutely convinced they could improve the system. What happened to them? Elias asked. Halvan didn't answer directly. The spell worked, they said instead. For a time. Magic became fluid. Creative. Unpredictable. And then? And then reality began to fray. Halvan raised a hand. The spell recoiled slightly, like a creature recognizing a predator. We sealed it, Halvan said. We erased its creator. We let history forget the near collapse. Elias felt cold settle in his bones. You didn't stop the spell because it was dangerous, he said. You stopped it because it made you unnecessary. Halvan met his gaze. We stopped it because someone has to decide when change becomes extinction. The spell pulsed again, brighter now, responding to Elias's attention. Mara grabbed his arm. Elias, he didn't look away. This is what you're afraid of, he said. A world that doesn't need you. Halvan stepped closer. No, they said softly. A world that doesn't survive you. The glass walls dimmed suddenly. The spell folded inward, its light thinning, as if withdrawing. Halvan lowered their hand. You will forget this room, they said to Mara. Mara stiffened. You can't just. I can, Halvan replied calmly. And I will. They turned to Elias. And you, Halvan said, will remember. Elias blinked. Why? Halvan studied him, something like resignation passing through their eyes. Because you are already too far gone, they said. And because the system does not fear rebels. They stepped back toward the door. It fears successors. The door closed. The glass walls faded, resolving back into ordinary stone. The second door vanished as if it had never been. Mara sagged against the table, breathing hard. What was I just looking at? She asked faintly. Elias closed his eyes. You won't remember, he said quietly. Mara frowned. Remember what? Elias opened his eyes again. The forgotten classroom looked the same as it always had. But Elias felt the spell still burning behind his thoughts, unfinished, alive, waiting. And he understood then what the system was truly protecting. Not the world. Its place in it. Professor Halvan did not summon Elias. That was how Elias knew something had changed. Days passed in the interim wing without incident. Lessons continued. The benches filled and filled again. Names faded quietly. New faces appeared with the same hollow uncertainty Elias remembered from his first night. But Halvan did not look at him. Not once. Elias felt the absence like pressure behind the eyes. In the wing, attention was a currency. When it was withdrawn, it was never accidental. Mara noticed too. They're letting you think, she whispered one evening as they walked the corridor. That's worse. About what? Elias asked. Mara hesitated. About whether you're still choosing. That night, Elias dreamed of the spell. Not the one in the glass room, but the idea of it. Magic folding in on itself, learning restraint instead of force. A system that didn't need erasure to maintain balance. When he woke, the dream clung to him like residue. The next lesson was different. Professor Halvan stood before the students, hands folded as always, posture calm, but the air felt tighter. The seams of light along the walls dimmed, attentive. You have been taught how to deny magic, Halvan said. How to contain it. How to erase it when necessary. Their gaze swept the room, lingering briefly on Elias without acknowledgement. But you have not been taught why. Elias's pulse quickened. The world believes the interim wing exists to prevent dark magic, Halvan continued. That we identify threats before they emerge. Several students nodded. It was the closest thing they had to an explanation. That, Halvan said, is the lie. The word landed heavily. You are not trained to stop darkness, Halvan continued. Darkness is easy. Predictable. It announces itself. Halvan stepped closer to the edge of the platform. You are trained to stop change. Silence. Magic does not want to remain static, Halvan said. It pushes. It experiments. It rewrites itself through people like you. Elias felt the truth of it settle deep in his bones. You are anomalies, Halvan said. And anomalies cannot be allowed to propagate. A student near the back whispered, so we're prisoners. Halvan shook their head. No. Prisoners are kept alive because they might be useful later. The room chilled. You are safeguards, Halvan said. And safeguards must sometimes be removed. Elias stood. Halvan did not stop him. You told me the system exists to protect the world, Elias said. But the spell I saw, Halvan raised a hand, and the room froze. Careful, they said quietly. You are allowed to remember. You are not allowed to persuade. Elias swallowed. You don't erase us because we're dangerous, he said. You erase us because we prove you're unnecessary. Halvan regarded him with something like approval. Correct, they said. And yet here we remain. Because the world still needs you, Elias said. Or so you claim. Halvan's voice softened. Because the world cannot survive everyone being like you. They turned back to the class. This is the final lesson of the interim wing, Halvan said. You will not escape. You will not dismantle the system. Several students stared in quiet horror. You will either become part of it, Halvan continued, or you will be absorbed by it. Elias's hands clenched. You're asking us to choose erasure, he said. Halvan shook their head again. No, they replied. We are offering you continuity. They met Elias's gaze fully now. Those who accept become us, Halvan said. They maintain the balance. They decide which changes are survivable. And the rest? Elias asked. Halvan didn't answer. They didn't need to. That night, Elias returned to the forgotten classroom. His parchment lay where he'd hidden it. The list of names had grown longer than he remembered. Not because he had added to it, but because the ink had. New names had surfaced in faint, unfamiliar handwriting. Older. Older than the wing. Older than the castle itself. Names of previous custodians. Previous Halvans. The system had never been dismantled. It had been inherited. Elias understood then. He was not meant to escape the interim wing. He was meant to replace it. Elias did not rebel loudly. That, he understood now, was how people disappeared. Instead, he listened. He attended lessons. He followed instructions. He denied spells when told to deny them and stepped back when Professor Halvan's gaze sharpened. He let the system believe it had succeeded, that he had reached the quiet, obedient acceptance that always came before absorption. But at night, when the wing dimmed and the seams of light along the walls thinned into something like sleep, Elias worked. Memory, he learned, had a temperature. He felt it first by accident. He was lying in bed, repeating names as he always did, when one slipped, not vanished, but shifted. The syllables of Elowenpike bent slightly, like metal warmed just enough to be reshaped. Elias froze. He followed the sensation inward. The memory wasn't gone. It was being moved. Not erased, not destroyed, redirected, siphoned away into something larger. A reservoir he could feel but not see. The wing wasn't deleting people. It was collecting them. Elias sat up, heart racing. If memory could be moved, then it could be intercepted. The next day, during lessons, he began to test the idea carefully. When Professor Halvan demonstrated a controlled erasure, removing a minor detail from a harmless training construct, Elias felt the pull again. That subtle drag, like a tide beneath thought. He didn't resist. He redirected. The effort was delicate. Too much force and the system would notice. Too little and the memory would slip away as intended. Elias imagined cupping water in his hands, letting it flow without spilling. The construct vanished. But something remained. That night, Elias whispered the detail aloud. And it stayed. He laughed, softly, silently, then clamped down on the sound. Joy was dangerous here. Over the following weeks, Elias refined the skill. He learned how to fold memories, compressing them so they took up less space. How to anchor them to sensations, cold stone, the smell of dust, the ache in his palms, so they were harder to extract. How to hide them inside other memories, nesting them like contraband in plain sight. The system tugged. Elias let it. He gave it fragments. Edges. Shadows. He kept the core. Mara noticed the change. "You're different," she said one evening as they sat in the corridor, backs against the wall. "You're heavier." Elias considered lying. "Instead," he said, "I remember things." Mara's breath caught. "That's not possible." "It is," Elias replied. "It's just not allowed." He told her then, not everything, but enough. About memory being redirected. About interception. About hiding? Mara listened in silence, fear and wonder battling behind her eyes. "They'll kill you," she whispered when he finished. "They can't," Elias said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because they don't erase leaders," he replied. "They replace them." Mara looked away. "That's worse." "Yes," Elias agreed. "But it gives us time." The next erasure happened 3 days later. A boy named Ren vanished mid-lesson. The class barely reacted. Ren had been quiet, careful, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of student the system preferred to remove unnoticed. Elias felt the pull as Ren's presence was withdrawn. He acted instantly. He folded the memory, compressed it, anchored it to his own name, Elias Crow, Elias Crow, Elias Crow, until the two felt inseparable. The pull resisted. The wing noticed. The seams of light along the walls flared brighter, then dimmed again. Professor Halvan turned slowly. Their gaze locked onto Elias. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Halvan smiled. "Interesting," they said softly. Elias's pulse thundered, but he kept his face calm. "Memory," Halvan continued, addressing the class, "is not meant to be hoarded." Their eyes did not leave Elias. "It must flow," Halvan said. "Or it stagnates." Elias understood the warning. That night, he found the forgotten classroom altered again. The door appeared instantly, no hesitation now. Inside, the shelves trembled faintly, like something beneath them was breathing. At the table lay a new parchment. Not blank. Written in the same faint, ancient script as before were words Elias had not written. "You cannot steal from yourself." Elias stared at the message. Then, slowly, deliberately, he sat down and added a line beneath it. "Watch me." The ink held. For the first time since entering the interim wing, Elias felt the system push back hard enough to notice. And he smiled. Because resistance meant one thing. He was no longer invisible. Elias returned to the main school on a night when the castle thought he was asleep. He did not force the doors to open. He did not deny the wards outright. He listened, to the way the magic held itself, to the quiet assumptions it made about who belonged where. Then he stepped through the spaces it had already decided were empty. The corridor beyond the interim wing did not appear. It had never stopped being there. Stone warmed beneath his fingers as he passed, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. Portraits lined the walls now, dozing, murmuring, shifting in their frames. They did not look at him. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't know they should. Elias moved slowly, every sense open. The castle felt different here. Louder. Less precise. Magic layered on magic, old walls reinforced by newer ones, rules stacked until no one remembered who wrote the first line. It was beautiful. And careless. He followed the sound of voices. The great hall glowed ahead, warm and alive, candles floating in lazy constellations. The long tables were filled, not with first years now, but older students, laughing, arguing, leaning close over shared secrets. Life. Elias stopped at the threshold. For a moment, the memory of his sorting ceremony threatened to overwhelm him, the weight of the hat, the hush of the crowd, his name spoken aloud. He anchored himself carefully, folding the memory inward so it wouldn't bleed away. Then he stepped inside. No one reacted. That was the first blow. He walked along the edge of the hall, past the red and gold table, the blue and bronze. Faces blurred together, some familiar, some not. Students he had shared classes with passed within inches of him, their robes brushing his arm. None of them looked up. Elias stopped beside a boy he recognized immediately. Jonah Whitcomb. They had shared a dormitory once. Jonah used to snore, used to complain about cold drafts, used to borrow Elias's quills and never return them. "Jonah," Elias said quietly. Jonah laughed at something his friend had said and took a bite of bread. Elias tried again. Jonah. It's me. Nothing. The name Elias Crow stirred in his chest, sharp and urgent. He pressed it forward carefully, like offering proof of existence. I'm Elias, he said. Jonah looked up then. Hope flared, and died. Jonah's eyes slid past Elias, unfocused, confused, like someone searching for the source of a sound that didn't quite exist. Did you hear something? Jonah asked his friend. No, the girl replied. What? Jonah shook his head and went back to eating. Elias stepped back, breath unsteady. I'm still here, he thought. I'm standing right here. He moved on. At the teacher's table, familiar figures sat in conversation. Professors he had admired. Ones who had corrected his essays, praised his precision, warned him not to overthink things. He stopped before one of them, a witch with silver hair and kind eyes who had once told him he had a gift for noticing patterns. Professor, Elias said. She didn't look up. Elias felt something inside him crack, not loudly, but deeply. He wandered the castle then, drifting through halls and staircases like a ghost who hadn't learned the rules yet. He passed his old classroom. His former dormitory. His bed was gone. Not moved. Replaced. Another student's things occupied the space as if it had never been his at all. Elias sat on the edge of the empty stair and closed his eyes. He tested the system carefully. He spoke his name again, louder this time, letting the syllables carry weight. Elias Crow. The magic around him rippled faintly, like water disturbed by a pebble. For a split second, the castle hesitated. Then it corrected. The ripple smoothed away. Elias felt the pressure immediately, the system pushing back, not violently, but firmly. Like a hand on his chest guiding him away from a place he was no longer allowed to stand. You don't belong here anymore. The thought wasn't voiced. It was enforced. Elias retreated before the correction could harden into something worse. The corridor to the interim wing welcomed him back with chilling ease. Mara was waiting, arms crossed, face pale. You went, she said. Yes. They didn't see you, did they? No. Mara swallowed. Do you exist at all out there? Elias didn't answer immediately. He thought of Jonah's blank stare. Of his bed replaced. Of the castle smoothing him out like a wrinkle in fabric. I exist, he said finally. But not officially. Mara laughed weakly. That's worse than being dead. Yes, Elias agreed. That night, Elias wrote a new name on his parchment. Not Elowen's. Not Wren's. His own. Elias Crow. The ink wavered. Thinned. Then, slowly, it held. Elias stared at it until his eyes burned. Because if the system could erase him from the world, then the only place he could still be real was here. Elias found the archivist by accident. That, he would later understand, was the only way anyone ever did. The corridor appeared when he was no longer searching, when his thoughts had drifted to the quiet terror of being unseen, when the effort of holding his own name intact had exhausted him enough to loosen his grip on intention. The wall simply opened. Not split. Not vanished. It made room. A narrow passage revealed itself, descending gently, spiraling downward in a way that felt older than the castle above it. The air was cooler here, heavier, carrying the weight of dust and something else, something like parchment left too long in the dark. Elias followed it. At the bottom lay a vast chamber. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into shadow, stacked with ledgers, scrolls, tablets, and objects Elias couldn't name, rings dulled with age, one snapped cleanly in half, shards of glass that hummed faintly when he passed. Every surface carried the quiet ache of memory. And at the center of it all sat a single desk. Behind it, a figure hunched over an open ledger, writing by the light of a floating lamp that pulsed softly, as though it too were trying to remember how bright it should be. They did not look up. "I was wondering when you'd find this place," the figure said. Their voice was dry, worn thin by years of careful use. "You're not supposed to be here," Elias replied. The figure smiled faintly. "No one is." Elias stepped closer. The archivist, because there was no other word for them, was difficult to describe. Their features seemed to rearrange themselves when Elias tried to focus. Old, then younger. Male, then not. Solid and yet somehow provisional. "What is this place?" Elias asked. "The remainder," the archivist said, finally looking up. Their eyes were sharp, painfully aware. "What's left after consensus is withdrawn." Elias's pulse quickened. "You remember them?" The archivist nodded. "All of them." They gestured to the shelves. "Every name that ever slipped. Every life smoothed out of the world so the edges wouldn't catch." Elias swallowed. "Why?" "Because forgetting has consequences," the archivist replied. "Someone has to account for them." They closed the ledger and folded their hands. "The wing tells you erasure is containment," they continued. "That balance must be preserved." "They aren't wrong." Elias stiffened. "But they aren't telling you the cost." The archivist stood and led Elias between the shelves. As they walked, the objects whispered, not audibly, but insistently. Elias felt memories brush against him, tugging, recognizing him as something dangerously close. The archivist stopped before a shelf of ledgers bound in black. "These," they said, "are the collapses." They pulled one free and opened it. Elias recoiled. The pages were not words but scenes, cities bending inward, spells unraveling mid-cast, time looping in jagged fragments. Whole regions erased not by malice, but by magic moving too fast, too freely. Each collapse followed the same pattern, the archivist said softly. Unrestricted evolution. No breaks. No consensus. Elias's chest tightened. So the wing is right. The archivist's gaze sharpened. About the danger. Not about the necessity of their methods. They turned another page. Here, a different scene, the wing dismantled. Erasure halted. Memory restored indiscriminately. Chaos followed. Balance, the archivist said, is not optional. Magic will not tolerate it being ignored. Elias closed his eyes. Then what choice is there? The archivist studied him. That, they said, is why you're here. They led him back to the desk and opened a final ledger, thinner than the rest, its pages mostly blank. This, the archivist said, is the future. Elias frowned. It's empty. For now, the archivist agreed. Because it has not yet decided whether to exist. They met his gaze. The wing believes the system must remain unchanged, the archivist said. You believe it must be destroyed. Elias opened his mouth, and stopped. No, he said slowly. I believe it must be different. The archivist smiled for the first time. Exactly, they said. And that belief is the most dangerous thing of all. They closed the ledger gently. If you succeed, the archivist continued, you will save countless lives. You will make magic gentler, slower, kinder. And if I fail? The archivist's smile faded. Then the collapses you saw will seem merciful. Elias felt the weight of it settle over him, not as fear, but as responsibility. What happens to you? He asked. The archivist shrugged. I am what happens when someone refuses to forget and refuses to lead. They turned back to their desk. You will not come here again, they said. Not like this. Why? Because after this, the archivist replied, you won't be asking what the system does. They picked up their quill. You'll be deciding what it becomes. The light dimmed. When Elias turned back, the passage was already closing, the shelves smoothing into stone. He stood alone once more in the corridor. But he was not the same. For the first time, Elias understood the true shape of the lie. The system was not evil. It was necessary. And that made changing it far more terrifying than destroying it ever could be. The first change Elias made was almost invisible. That was intentional. He didn't touch the wing's core. He didn't interfere with lessons or halt erasures. He didn't announce rebellion or try to dismantle anything that had survived centuries by noticing such attempts before they could breathe. He adjusted flow. Memory, Elias had learned, moved like water. It followed channels laid down long ago, pulled by gravity the system had carefully designed. Erasure wasn't deletion, it was redirection, a siphoning of presence into quieter reservoirs where nothing could disturb the balance. Elias carved a new channel. Just a hair's width wide. He chose a minor case. A student reassigned not for failure or curiosity, but for excess, a boy whose magic healed too quickly, corrected itself mid-spell, refused to behave predictably. His name was Taran Holt. Elias held it firmly as the pull began, folded it, anchored it, then slowed it. Not stopped. Slowed. The erasure took longer than usual. No alarms sounded. No walls flared. Professor Halvan did not appear. Elias exhaled. That night, he waited. Taran Holt did not vanish completely. Students remembered a boy. Not his face. Not his voice. But a presence, an impression that someone had once laughed too loudly near the benches, that someone had healed a cut no one else could close. It wasn't much. But it was new. Elias returned to the archivist's ledger in his mind, to the images of collapse and ruin. He moved carefully now, making tiny adjustments, watching for fractures. Over the next weeks, he repeated the experiment. Small changes. Controlled memory bleed. Partial retention. The wing resisted, but weakly. Like an old structure adjusting to new weight rather than rejecting it outright. Mara noticed. They're remembering, she whispered one night. Not names. But space. Elias nodded. That's enough to start. It wasn't enough to save anyone. But it was enough to change trajectory. Then the system reacted. It didn't strike Elias directly. It summoned history. Professor Halvan led him to a chamber Elias had never seen before, a circular room carved deep into the castle's bones. The air here was heavy with old wards, layered so densely Elias felt pressure behind his eyes just standing there. At the center hovered an image. Not an illusion. A memory. Watch, Halvan said. The image unfolded. A group of unsorted students stood where Elias now stood. Older clothes. Older magic. Faces sharp with conviction and fear. At their center was a woman with eyes too bright, her magic humming with restrained possibility. She was like you, Halvan said. Better, perhaps. The woman spoke in the memory, her voice ringing with certainty. We can fix this, she said. We don't need erasure. We don't need lies. Magic can learn restraint. Elias's chest tightened. She dismantled the wing, Halvan continued. Carefully. Thoughtfully. With the best intentions. The memory shifted. Magic surged. Not violently at first, creatively. Spells rewrote themselves mid-cast. New forms emerged. Healing that adapted too quickly. Wards that learned to bypass themselves. People cheered. Then the cheering stopped. The image darkened. Reality tore, not all at once, but in seams. Streets bent inward. Time stuttered. Entire neighborhoods folded into nothing, not destroyed, but misaligned. Screams echoed. The woman stood at the center of it all, horror dawning too late. She refused to stop, Halvan said quietly. Because stopping meant admitting she was wrong. The memory ended. The chamber fell silent. Elias swallowed hard. You let her fail. Halvan shook their head. We tried to stop her. You let the world burn, Elias shot back. Halvan met his gaze. And the world survived. They stepped closer. That is the cost of learning, Halvan said. And why we do not repeat experiments lightly. Elias's voice trembled. So you'll never allow change. Halvan studied him. No, they said. We allow you. Elias stiffened. She failed because she moved too fast, Halvan continued. Because she trusted magic more than consequence. Their eyes hardened. You are different, Halvan said. You listen. Elias realized the trap then. The system wasn't afraid of reform. It was grooming it. Using him to refine the process, to find the narrow path between stagnation and annihilation. You want me to finish what she started, Elias said. But without threatening your control. Halvan inclined their head. Without threatening survival. Elias looked back at the place where the memory had hovered. He understood now why the archivist had not tried to lead. Why the system punished persistence. Because reform wasn't stopped by force. It was absorbed. And if Elias continued, he wouldn't be overthrowing the wing. He would be perfecting it. That night, Elias stood alone in the corridor, the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He could stop. Let the system continue unchanged. Or he could proceed, slowly, carefully, knowing that every improvement he made would also make the system harder to dismantle. For the first time, Elias wondered whether failure had been the rebellion. And success the true defeat. Professor Halvan did not summon Elias to a chamber this time. They invited him to walk. The corridor unfolded ahead of them, smooth and unresistant, as if the castle itself had agreed to listen. No doors appeared. No seams of light brightened or dimmed. The wing felt calm. That frightened Elias more than hostility ever had. You've been careful, Halvan said, hands clasped behind their back as they walked. Careful enough that the system has not rejected you. Elias said nothing. In another life, Halvan continued, you would have been erased by now. Or released. Released to become a villain, Elias said. Halvan nodded. Yes. They stopped at an intersection Elias did not remember existing. 3 corridors branched outward, each identical, each humming with restrained magic. This is where choice begins, Halvan said. Elias looked at the paths. What happens if I walk away? Halvan considered the question honestly. You will continue as you are for a time. Then you will become inconvenient. And Mara? Halvan's gaze sharpened. She is not like you. Elias's chest tightened. She does not hear magic, Halvan continued. She survives through caution, not affinity. She will be reassigned eventually. The words landed with deliberate cruelty. You could prevent that, Halvan said softly. Elias turned to face them. By becoming you. Halvan did not deny it. By becoming necessary, they corrected. The corridors pulsed faintly, as if eager. You would guide reform, Halvan said. Slow it. Shape it. Ensure it never outruns the world's ability to adapt. And if I refuse? Halvan's voice was gentle. Then someone else will be shaped to replace you. Someone less thoughtful. Elias laughed quietly. You make it sound like mercy. It is, Halvan said. Compared to collapse. They gestured down the central corridor. Walk this path, Halvan said, and you will inherit the wing. You will decide who is erased, who is slowed, who is remembered just enough to be harmless. Elias imagined it, authority, restraint, control. The power to save Mara. To soften erasure. To guide magic rather than strangle it. To make the system better. You're not asking me to choose good or evil, Elias said. No, Halvan replied. Those are childish categories. They met his gaze. We're asking you to choose stability or hope. Elias closed his eyes. He saw Elowen Pike's blank stare. Taran Holt's half-presence. The woman from the memory, standing amid collapsing streets, refusing to stop. He saw Mara, alive because she was careful, doomed because she wasn't extraordinary enough. When he opened his eyes, the corridors had not moved. What happens to you? Elias asked. Halvan smiled faintly. I will be remembered as necessary. And then forgotten, Elias said. Yes. The honesty of it hurt. Elias stepped forward. Not down the central corridor. But not away either. I'll do it, he said. Halvan exhaled, a sound Elias hadn't known they were capable of. On one condition, Elias continued. Halvan stilled. Name it. No more full erasures without my consent, Elias said. No releasing unsorted to become monsters. No lies to justify your existence. Halvan studied him for a long time. Finally, they nodded. Agreed. The corridors shifted, subtly realigning. Elias felt the system accept the compromise. Somewhere deep in the wing, something ancient adjusted its weight. You've chosen wisely, Halvan said. Elias did not answer. Because wisdom had nothing to do with it. That night, Mara found him sitting alone, staring at the wall. You look like someone died, she said. Someone did, Elias replied. Just not who you think. She frowned. What did you do? Elias met her gaze. I chose, he said. Mara's expression softened. Then make sure it was worth it. Elias didn't tell her the truth. That the system didn't care about worth. Only about balance. And that by stepping forward, he hadn't broken the chain. He had become the next link. Change did not announce itself. It seeped. At first, Elias thought he had succeeded. The first reforms were surgical, so small they barely qualified as rebellion. Memory bleed was slowed further. Erasures required consensus, not impulse. Unsuitable magic was paused instead of dismantled, folded into quiet holding states where it could be observed rather than destroyed. No collapses followed. No alarms rang. The wing adapted. Students lingered longer before disappearing. Some left impressions behind that lasted weeks instead of days. A few names, only a few, held long enough to be spoken twice without thinning. Mara noticed immediately. They're staying, she whispered one night. Not all of them. But more. Elias nodded. It's working. That was when the first fracture appeared. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming wards. No shattered stone. Just a spell misfiring in the main school, a levitation charm that refused to descend, hovering stubbornly in place no matter how many counterspells were cast. A curiosity. Then a second incident. A healing charm that regenerated tissue too perfectly, rewriting scars that had existed for decades. Patients woke confused, and moored by bodies that remembered differently than their minds. Elias felt each anomaly like a tug in his spine. Magic was responding. Adapting. Faster than he had anticipated. Professor Halvan stood beside him in the observation chamber, watching the strands of monitored magic twist and reweave. You accelerated the slope, Halvan said calmly. I slowed erasure, Elias replied. I didn't touch evolution. Halvan glanced at him. You removed friction. The words landed heavily. Over the following days, the reports multiplied. Spells that improved themselves after failure. Wards that learned new patterns without instruction. Students whose magic corrected errors before consequences could occur. Miracles. And beneath them, instability. Elias adjusted again. Introduced new limits. Redirected flow. Magic pushed back. Not violently. Persistently. It was learning how to move around him. "This is what she saw," Mara said one evening, voice tight. "Isn't it?" "Yes," Elias admitted. "And she kept going." "Yes." Mara studied him. "Will you?" Elias didn't answer. Because he could feel it now, the terrible truth settling into place. Magic did not want restraint. It tolerated it. And tolerance was temporary. The first collapse came quietly. A classroom vanished. Not exploded. Not destroyed. Simply misplaced. Students stepped into a corridor that should have been there and found sky instead. Gravity corrected itself moments later. No one was hurt. But the castle shuddered. The wing reacted instantly. Containment protocols surged. Old safeguards Elias had softened snapped back into place with violent precision. Professor Halvan turned to him. "This is the threshold," they said. "Beyond this, reform becomes revolution." Elias stared at the shimmering tear in the air where the classroom had been. "If I stop now," he said, "what happens?" Halvan didn't hesitate. "The system stabilizes. Your changes are absorbed. The wing continues. Slower. Kinder. Controlled. And if I don't?" Halvan's voice was quiet. "Then the world relearns fear." Elias closed his eyes. He saw the future branching, not into good and evil, but into degrees of ruin. Total stagnation. Or selective collapse. "This isn't breaking the chain," Elias said softly. "No," Halvan agreed. "It's testing how far it can stretch." That night, Elias stood alone at the heart of the wing, hands resting against the stone. He reached outward, not to deny magic, not to guide it, but to listen. Magic answered. Not with words. With urgency. It wanted to move. To change. To shed old limits like skin. And Elias understood, with sickening clarity, that the system had never truly constrained magic. It had only slowed it long enough for the world to catch up. He pulled back. The fractures sealed. The classroom reappeared. Students screamed, then laughed nervously, convinced it had been a trick of the light. Balance restored. Elias felt the cost immediately. Something inside him dimmed. Because he knew now, the chain could not be broken. Only tightened. Or allowed to snap. And he was standing exactly where both outcomes met. The world did not wait for Elias to decide. It began in places the wing could not see. A fishing village woke to find the tide frozen mid-motion, waves suspended like glass walls that neither crashed nor retreated. A forest deep in the north grew overnight, trees twisting upward too quickly, branches tangling into impossible knots, leaves shimmering with spells no one had cast. In the capital, time slipped for 3 seconds during a market day, and no one could agree on which 3 seconds they were. These were not attacks. They were symptoms. Elias felt them all. Not as visions, not as screams, but as pressure. Like too much air trapped beneath a sealed surface, searching for the weakest point. Magic was not rebelling. It was overflowing. Professor Halvan stood beside him in the monitoring chamber, watching strands of light fracture and reweave across a map that spanned half the wall. "It's spreading," Halvan said. "Your restraint slowed the wing. It did not slow magic." "I stabilized the core," Elias said. "You stabilized us," Halvan replied. "Not the world." The words landed with quiet cruelty. Reports flooded in faster than they could be catalogued. Wards misfired. Ancient enchantments rewrote themselves without warning. A bridge that had stood for centuries forgot it was supposed to connect two sides and folded inward, collapsing into a neat pile of stone. No explosions. No villains. Just reality quietly losing agreement with itself. Mara found Elias late that night, sitting on the floor of the wing's heart, back against the stone, hands pressed flat as if he could hold the world in place by force alone. "This isn't your fault," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Yes," Elias replied. "It is." He had given magic room to breathe. And it had taken more. The archivist's words echoed in his mind, "Balance is not optional." Elias reached inward, deeper than he ever had before. He did not adjust flow this time. He seized it. The wing roared. Not audibly, but structurally. Old safeguards flared back to life, slamming into place with ruthless efficiency. Memory siphons reopened. Erasure surged. Across the map, the fractures slowed. The frozen tide crashed at once, destroying half the village. The forest calcified, trees locking into brittle stone. The market's missing seconds snapped back, and 3 people collapsed, minds unable to reconcile what they'd lost. Containment worked. Too well. Elias staggered as the cost rippled back through him. Every correction carved something out of him: empathy, hope, possibility. He couldn't tell which anymore. "You see?" Halvan said softly. "Without us, this happens everywhere. With us, it happens. Selectively." Elias met their gaze, eyes hollow. "How many did I just erase?" he asked. Halvan didn't answer. They didn't need to. The wing hummed, satisfied. That night, Elias dreamed of doors snapping shut faster than he could reach them. Of names slipping through his fingers like sand. Of Mara standing on the far side of a corridor that refused to open. When he woke, the seams of light were dimmer than ever. The system had taken payment. Elias walked the corridors in silence, feeling the castle lean into him now, not as a watcher, but as an extension. Doors opened before he reached them. Rooms rearranged themselves at his approach. He was no longer an anomaly. He was infrastructure. The final report came at dawn. Stability restored. Global variance reduced. Acceptable loss thresholds met. Elias stared at the words until they blurred. "This is what survival looks like," Halvan said gently. Elias closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. And somewhere far away, a child's name faded without ever being spoken. Professor Halvan did not speak at first. They stood with Elias at the highest point of the wing, a place few ever reached, a narrow platform overlooking the deep mechanisms of containment. Below them, layers of magic moved in slow, deliberate cycles. Streams of light flowed downward, branching, folding, vanishing into stone. It looked peaceful. That, Elias thought, was the most unsettling part. "This is where it ends," Halvan said at last. Elias didn't respond. He had learned that endings here were rarely final. "You've seen collapse," Halvan continued. "And you've seen survival. Now you must understand why there is no third path." They gestured, and the magic below them shifted. Images rose, not memories this time, but truths stripped of narrative. Magic was not a force. It was an ecosystem. Spells were not commands, but negotiations. Patterns reinforced themselves through repetition, through belief, through shared agreement. When too many agreements changed at once, reality lost coherence. "Magic persists because it is constrained," Halvan said. "Not by morality. By friction." Elias watched as a spell looped endlessly below them, stabilizing a fault that wanted to widen. When friction is removed, Halvan continued, magic accelerates. It innovates. It optimizes. The image changed: growth, beauty, brilliance. Then rupture. Evolution without containment is not freedom, Halvan said. It is extinction. Elias felt the weight of it settle fully now, not as argument, but as inevitability. So the system must exist, Elias said. Yes, Halvan replied. And it must be unloved. They turned to face him. If the world ever believes this is cruelty rather than necessity, Halvan said, it will dismantle it again. And it will die again. Elias thought of stories told to children. Villains named and feared. Heroes praised for stopping them. Manufactured narratives. So you need monsters, Elias said. Halvan nodded. And custodians willing to be remembered as them. Silence stretched between them. Elias understood now why the archivist had stepped aside. Why reformers burned out. Why villains were allowed to rise. The system needed a shadow. And someone to stand in it. What happens to Mara? Elias asked quietly. Halvan's gaze softened, just slightly. She will live. She will forget this place. She will be ordinary. Elias swallowed. And me? Halvan's voice was almost kind. You will be necessary. The magic below them surged once, as if acknowledging the truth. This is the final lesson, Halvan said. You cannot save everyone. You can only decide who the world will never know it lost. Elias closed his eyes. He felt the pull of memory, the weight of names he carried folded deep inside himself. Elowen Pike. Taran Holt. So many others whose absence held the world together. He understood now. The system was not a prison. It was a dam. And someone had to stand at the gate. Elias opened his eyes. Teach me, he said. Halvan inclined their head. The wing adjusted. Somewhere deep in the castle, a new ledger opened. The wing did not celebrate Elias's decision. There were no ceremonies. No vows. No moment where the castle paused to acknowledge what he had become. Acceptance, Elias learned, was not an event. It was a subtraction. The first thing he lost was time. Not hours or days, but the sense of them. The wing no longer dimmed and brightened in cycles Elias could track. Lessons blurred into functions. Nights dissolved into quiet intervals where the system recalibrated and Elias stood at its center, hands pressed to stone, feeling the world strain against its limits. Professor Halvan remained for a while. They taught Elias how to listen without sympathy. How to weigh instability without imagining faces. How to measure acceptable loss without letting the word loss linger. Attachment introduces bias, Halvan said gently, the way one might explain gravity to a child. Bias destabilizes judgment. Elias understood. He practiced anyway. He folded Mara's name deep into himself, hiding it where the system's pull was weakest. Not to keep her here, that would end her, but to make sure she left intact. When the time came, it happened quietly. Mara woke one morning in a dormitory that was not the interim wing. She had friends she trusted. Classes she remembered attending. A past that made sense. She did not remember Elias Crow. Elias stood in the corridor as the memory finalized, feeling the system settle around the adjustment like water smoothing over a stone. He did not cry. That came later. The second thing he lost was anger. It bled away gradually, leached by necessity. Every time Elias stabilized a fracture, every time he chose erasure over collapse, silence over spectacle, the sharp edges of his outrage dulled. Not gone. Just blunted. The system rewarded efficiency. The third thing he lost was choice. Not because it was taken from him, but because it narrowed until only one option remained each time. Contain or fail. Erase or fracture. Decide now or let the world decide violently for you. Elias chose. Again. And again. And again. One night, If night still existed, Elias returned to the forgotten classroom. It no longer resisted him. The shelves stood orderly now, books aligned, dust settled. The room had been absorbed, repurposed, made safe. At the table lay his parchment. The list of names was shorter. Not because fewer had been taken, but because Elias could no longer hold them all. He traced a finger over the ink, feeling the faint echo of each absence. Elowen Pike. The name wavered. Elias closed his eyes and let it go. The relief was immediate. So was the guilt. That was the lesson Halvan had never spoken aloud. Memory hurt because it mattered, and the system could not afford custodians who hurt too much. When Elias opened his eyes again, the parchment had changed. Not erased. Rewritten. At the top of the page, in steady, impersonal script, were new words. Active stabilizations below them, no names appeared. Only numbers. Metrics. Thresholds. Elias understood then what his final sacrifice would be. Not his life. Not even his freedom. His story. Over time, the system would take his name the way it took all unnecessary weight. Elias Crow would become a function, then a pattern, then a process. A role others might inherit. A shadow no one would thank. He stood and placed his palm against the stone wall. "Do it," he said softly. The wing responded. The pull came gently this time, respectful in its inevitability. Elias felt his name loosen, syllables thinning, meaning lifting away from sound. Elias Crow, he thought one last time. The name dimmed, but did not vanish. Not yet. The system wasn't cruel. It was patient. As Elias stepped back into the corridor, he felt the castle align around him fully. He was no longer an anomaly. He was no longer even a person, in the way the world understood it. He was balance. And balance, he knew now, did not require remembrance. The great hall was louder than it had been in years. Candles floated high above the tables, their flames steady and bright, reflected in hundreds of eager faces turned toward the dais. The enchanted ceiling wore a perfect autumn sky, stars sharp, orderly, exactly where they were meant to be. Banners hung heavy with pride. Laughter rang clean and confident. The system was working. At the far end of the hall, the sorting hat rested on its stool, brim sagging with familiar age. It had been repaired more than once. Reinforced. Adjusted. Not visibly, but structurally. The magic stitched into it no longer hesitated the way it once had. Names were called. Students stepped forward. Houses claimed them. Applause followed. And beneath it all, the castle listened. High above the hall, beyond corridors no student would ever find, Elias watched. Not from a body. From a pattern. He felt the ceremony the way one felt pressure change before a storm. Subtle variations in magic. Minor deviations from expected distribution. All within acceptable thresholds. Until, a name echoed that did not settle. The sound struck the hall and rebounded, slightly misaligned, as if it had landed in the wrong place. The child stepped forward. They were small for their age. Quiet. Their posture too careful, their eyes too aware. Magic clung to them differently, not louder, not darker, but listening. The sorting hat was lowered. The hall waited. Inside the hat, magic stirred. Elias felt it immediately. Affinity. The child heard it too. The way spells leaned. The way enchantments strained against themselves. The subtle dishonesty of magic pretending to be static. The hat hesitated. Just for a breath. A ripple passed through the system. Elias assessed the variables instantly. Containment risk, low. Evolution potential, moderate. Collapse probability, negligible, if handled early. The hat spoke, its voice quiet inside the child's mind. Ah. The child flinched. Elias felt the echo of a long-ago night ripple faintly through the system. "You hear it," the hat said. "Don't you?" The child did not answer. The hat considered. In another age, this would have been dangerous. Now, it was routine. The hat's decision came swiftly. "Not yet," it said. The hat was lifted. A murmur moved through the hall, brief, confused, quickly smoothed over by practiced calm. "There will be a brief delay," the headmistress announced, her voice warm, untroubled. "The sorting will continue." The child was guided away gently, efficiently. No whispers. No tension. Just process. Elias adjusted the flow. The interim wing prepared itself automatically. The corridors aligned. The seams of light brightened. The system welcomed the anomaly. Above the hall, the ceremony resumed. Laughter returned. Certainty reasserted itself. The world remained unaware that anything unusual had occurred. That night, in the quiet between recalibrations, Elias allowed himself a single indulgence. He remembered. Not the child's name, that would be assigned later, or removed if necessary, but the feeling of sitting on the stool, the weight of the hat, the moment when the world decided you did not fit. It hurt less now. That was how he knew the system was complete. The final adjustment settled into place. The wing did not resist. The castle did not question. The story ended the way all stable systems preferred. Without drama. Without witnesses. Without names. The world stabilized. That was the phrase the reports used: flat, reassuring, final. Variance reduced. Collapse probability negligible. Innovation contained within survivable margins. The language was clean enough to convince anyone who read it that something had been saved. And it had. Cities did not fold in on themselves anymore. Time flowed where it should. Spells failed safely, predictably, instructively. Children grew up believing magic was a set of rules they could master, not a conversation that might answer back. History behaved. Elias maintained it all. He no longer perceived the world in moments, but in pressures and thresholds. He felt storms before clouds gathered, fractures before stone remembered it could crack. He guided, corrected, denied. The system flowed through him as naturally as breath once had. Sometimes, rarely, he allowed himself a memory. Not a name. Names were inefficient. A sensation. The feel of wood beneath small hands. The weight of a hat that thought too much. The sharp, aching certainty of being seen and rejected in the same instant. Those memories were dangerous, but Elias kept one. Just one. It reminded him why the system existed. Magic had tried to grow beyond the world's capacity to survive it. Not maliciously. Not cruelly. Simply because growth was what it did. And someone, many someones, across centuries, had learned the same terrible truth Elias had learned. That the world could not afford honesty from magic. Only management. The archivist's ledger still existed somewhere deep in the castle's bones, though Elias no longer visited it. There was no need. The past had been accounted for. The future predicted within acceptable margins. What remained was maintenance. Elias did not age. That surprised no one, least of all him. Time was another variable the system adjusted when necessary. Custodians lasted until they became inefficient, then were replaced. Seamlessly. Kindly. He sometimes wondered who would come after him. Someone quieter, perhaps. Less curious. Someone who would not remember as much, or feel the weight of names slipping through their hands. Someone better suited. The thought did not frighten him. It comforted him. On a night indistinguishable from any other, Elias felt a deviation. Small. Local. A child in the interim wing had begun asking the wrong questions. Not aloud. Internally. The kind that bent magic ever so slightly out of alignment. Elias observed. He did not intervene immediately. The system had taught him patience. He watched the child sit alone, listening to the walls the way Elias once had. Watched the moment of recognition bloom, quiet, irreversible. Affinity detected. Risk minimal. Outcome predictable. Elias adjusted the flow. The child's questions softened. Their attention redirected. The sharpest edges of curiosity dulled just enough to keep them safe. They would live. They would forget. They would become ordinary. The world continued. That was the cost. Not suffering. Not horror. Not cruelty. Potential. The system did not erase people because they were dangerous. It erased what they might become. Elias felt no triumph in this realization. Only clarity. High above the great hall, the ceiling showed a sky full of stars, perfectly placed, eternally unchanged. Students laughed beneath it, confident in a world that made sense. They would never know how close magic always was to unmaking that certainty. They would never know Elias Crow. And that, finally, was the point. The system did not require gratitude. It required forgetting. As the night recalibrated itself around him, Elias allowed one last thing to surface, a fragment he had hidden too deeply for even the wing to touch. A single sentence, worn thin with age. This could have been different. He held it. Measured it. Then let it go. The system settled. Balance held. And somewhere, a child slept peacefully, unaware of the future they would never be allowed to imagine. The world survived. That was all it had ever wanted. And that was the cost.